among other things. I mean, for me, it's also a fascination with science. You know, what you were bringing up, Aviv, is like, if I am way too caught up in my 3D mindset and, you know, my egoic self and my day to day and taking all that way too seriously, if I stop and think about photosynthesis for a while and then get to the point where I'm no longer thinking about it and I'm just awestruck by it. In other words, I've gotten past, you know, whatever the formula is, and I'm just appreciating the miracle of the fact that photosynthesis even happens. Or if I look at, I love quantum mechanics, you know, and if I'm reading a well-written article about quantum mechanics that really gets into the weird of it, like that brings me back to this sense of just, we really have no idea what's going on here. And we get glimpses once in a while, and we're blessed with those glimpses. And part of what we're here to do is be those sensory beings on the outpost, bringing that information back for the rest of humanity. But it's fascination and it's poignancy and it's being awestruck, and then also sometimes just hearing something that tickles our fancy in some way and going with that. I mean, it's all of it. It's just being that sensory organism out there on the frontier.
What are your deepest beliefs and understanding of what you describe as being on with your hearing, with your seeing, with your presence, being a raw nerve? What is this experience that you're describing in this way?
Well, one thing I'd love to say, and I really appreciated what Holly was saying about science, is I think one of the modern myths that we must reject is that the artist and the scientist are hanging out at different cocktail parties, because actually we're very fine bedfellows, and I think that, you know, when we began to separate these things out, like even just in, I don't know if we want to go down this road, but, you know, even just in like modern education practices, oh, you're good at math, you go this way. Oh, you're good at art, you go that way. And so I think, you know, a conversation like this is an attempt to like collect and connect and integrate some of these ideas back together. Some of the most fun I have in my work is working with world-class scientists, Nobel Prize winners who are trying to solve the biggest science questions of the world, and I give them William Stafford's Traveling Through the Dark, which has a moral dilemma at the center of it. And at first, when they look at it and they think, who is this woman? I you know, I have to sort of like armor myself up, right? But when I say, just, I want you to go in here, I want you to take a look. If there's nothing there for you, fine, tell me why there's nothing there. But if there is something there, then I want to know why, and to make the invitation. So I think the first thing is like this turned on state that you're talking about is, first of all, being willing to dispel some of the myths that we have about poetry, our relationship to poetry, our, you know, how the, you know, notion of science and art are not, you know, connected in some way because it's bogus. And I think this, the second thing I would say about being, you know, like turned on and opened up and tuned in, and I like to talk about awareness, like it has a little dial, you know, like an old school radio dial, right? And I think, you know, all art is about longing, a desire, you know, to cross over, to express, like Holly was talking about, to dance it out or paint it or create a garden or whatever it is. It's just, it's about this longing we have, which, you know, can be a holy longing and it can be a really painful longing. But I think that that's, you know, entering into that state of being on that edge of that threshold, that horizon that you were talking about, Aviv, that's part of the tuning in or turning on to, you know, what could be transformational about poetry and other kinds of art or discovery.
I love what you brought in about the science, unifying them, because you're right, they're never separate. And if you actually, if you read some of the things that some of our greatest scientists have said, you know, it's clear they're speaking. I mean, they're motivated by capacity for not capacity. They're motivated by wonder.
Mm-hmm.
And they have certain aptitudes that take them down a certain path, but it's still driven by wonder.
Mm-hmm.
And if they lose that, they end up not being very effective at what they're doing. But if they're driven by that, they keep going, what is that next frontier, frontier? And often they write about it in very poetic terms.
Mhm.
And so it's that I'm not sure where wonder comes from. But you, like, what is that nudge that says to me, you've kind of gone numb? Do you need to be numb now because you've just got to book through a bunch of stuff, or is it time to switch something back on? Where does that awareness come from? Well, it comes from some aspect of self that is larger. I mean, I believe that is larger from the ego, but once in a while it comes from a nudge from the outside. Everything in quotes because it's all in relative terms. Sometimes something will just wake me up. But what it's waking up is that capacity for wonder. And I'm lucky. For me, it's never deeply asleep. Mm. I mean, it's always right there. Unless I'm sound asleep in the middle of the bed, if something happens that, I'm likely to just, if nothing else, just kind of overreact to it sometimes. I mean, I'm one of those people who will just cry at the drop of a hat. If I see an act of kindness or even just thinking about it now, I can feel it rising in me. It's like it's that sensitivity, which I wouldn't trade for anything. In other people, it may manifest as a very different thing, but for me, it comes down to wonder. And English is so amazing because it has all these tricky words that are both nouns and verbs, and they have so much, like the word wonder. I'm wondering about something, or I have a capacity for wonder. It's like it seems like such a simple, straightforward on the surface thing, but it's not. It's a gateway. It's a portal to this whole aspect of what it is to be alive that we use this little word as a shorthand for, but just that one word is like mind-blowing to me if you really spend time with it and engage, which I've never done before. This is an example of the kind of thing I was alluding to before about why I love conversations like this, because I don't know what I think about some things until I have a chance to reflect on them. I've never sat down with the word wonder and asked it what it wants to show me.
So you're describing the nudge of wonder as the propelling force of science, the discovery of science, and Libby is discovering the sense of longing that you're saying is at the foundation of all arts, perhaps. And part of the way that I experience both of those arising natures in our humanness is that what is so deeply central to being alive in the fuller sense is that any space, any ecology, any circumstance we enter, if we are truly fully alive, when we are truly fully alive, we seem to be attuned to discover and find the energy, the latent, the energy potential in that space, and somehow to become conduit, to unlock, to unleash that energy from the realms of potential such that it becomes kinetic. And poetry is one way to turn the potential into kinetic. The energy potential into something that moves, that propels, that motivates others.
You reminded me of something, and I hope it's pulling at a particular thread, but it popped into my head and I wanted to share it because it was something, like Holly was saying, having a conversation, then discovering yourself. My friend David White says, like you're surprised to hear yourself say something like, oh, but this person I was talking with said that all creativity must come from a place of neutrality. And I thought that was so fascinating because I think I've always felt like it had to come from a place of, I don't know, something positive, right? But what she was really saying was, if we're not in this completely present moment, we don't have access to the whole range. And and really the whole range of feelings, which makes us human and differentiates us, right? And so that sense of, okay, well, I'm here, I'm alive. We all want this aliveness, and I get really fascinated by all the things that try to keep us from the aliveness. That can take up a lot of my time, thinking about those things. But I think when we're in that space of aliveness and we're fully present to it, then for me anyway, I experienced something like, I feel like a name dropper today. Anyway, what Elizabeth Gilbert talks about in Big Magic, which is that genius it comes to visit you. And it gives you that phrase, that word, that image, that sound, that song, but if you're not listening, it moves on to the next person. It moves on. And so for me, that deep listening, that aliveness, that sense of neutrality, if I'm freaked out about something or super excited about something, I'm actually not listening that well.
Can you try to open up further how you appreciate this idea of neutrality and what might be the practice of stepping into that sense of open neutrality such that you are available to the full range, the full spectrum of what may want to work its way through you?
I mean, I'll share, and I'd love to hear what Holly, also does. I mean, for me, so a few months ago, feeling the effects in the way I experienced, many gifts from the pandemic and quarantine time and other sorts of things that had to do with isolation and being very careful about how I ingested news and information and things like that. I found myself when I was sitting down for my own writing practice, like having to wade through all this detritus of worry, anxious, self-doubt, all the things that show up, when I'm getting ready to be honest about anything. And so for me, the process of removing that, I don't know how to describe it other than detritus, muddy, mucky, foggy stuff that keeps me from having that clear perception. And then is to get to a place of neutrality. So it might be a particular practice, meditation, walking, gardening, being in the natural world for me is especially like my phrase is go to the woods. And so, because that for me is literally and metaphorically grounding. And so if I'm grounded, then I hear, then I see, then I get to have, I don't know, it feels like a kind of a pure connection to my own creativity, my own, I don't know how to it's one of those indescribable things, but I don't know. How about you, Holly?
Yesterday, I'm smiling a bit because yesterday I was having such a tough time getting grounded that I just had to go find a tree. I just, and my natural state tends to be somewhat ungrounded anyway, more expanded, but not necessarily down in the earth. And so when I actually notice that I'm not grounded, it's like, okay, I just need to go really find a tree. And there's a lot of that. And what you're saying about the stimulation of our modern quote unquote life and this past year, the various inputs that can interfere with that sense of presence are many. And I need quiet time. I need time outdoors. More than anything else for me, I feel like I just need to remember more about what I am, like what we are as people. So it can happen anywhere, but I have to remember that we're more than these beings who are running around trying to get everything right and trying to protect ourselves. And when I remember that, which isn't usually that hard, but when I actually get the impulse from the muse or whatever to remember that, then that opens a door that expands me back out into awareness. And I can be, one of my favorite poems was, I was sitting in a Starbucks on Queen Anne, and I just overheard a snippet of conversation. And I remember making the conscious choice at that moment, am I going to write what just came to me, or am I just going to appreciate the experience and get on with my business? And I decided to write it out, which I don't always do. But it was inspired by overheard snippets of conversation in a Starbucks. So it can happen anywhere. It's just whether I'm remembering to honor not only what I am, but it's often if I'm around other people, if I am I really honoring what they are to the extent that I even know what they are. I mean, just remembering that there's so much more going on there than what I might see on the surface. And then the smallest gesture or expression might inspire me to just like write down a phrase that may or may not ever turn into a poem, but at least in that moment, it means that something happened that I noticed that transformed something in me in that moment. And whether it ever makes it onto the page or not, it's not secondary because I love poetry, but it's a related, but it's a different thing. Transformation has already happened. And it's a question of, am I going to try to capture it in a way that might actually be able to bring that to somebody else?